Good evening, everyone. My name is Alex Ricci. I'm one of the career advisors here with the Mullen Center for Career Engagement. And tonight I'm excited to bring you the Careers in Government Affairs alumni panel. We have three fantastic alums who've decided to join us, and we will be hosted by the incredible Dr. Teresa Cosby. Yeah, I'm all about the great intro.
Right.
How this is going to work, we are actually recording this session, but you are not visible to us, since it's only the people who are visible on your screen right now. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A functions below. I will be monitoring the entire time. But otherwise, I hope you enjoy, and thank you all for coming.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Teresa Cosby, and I'm a professor in the Department of Politics and International Affairs. And tonight we're going to have a conversation with some great Furman alum, I can top Alex, about working in government. And they're going to talk to you about how they got started in their careers. They're going to offer you advice on how to pursue your dream career. And then they will answer questions that you will pose to them from the audience. We're going to do about 45 minutes of conversation with our panelists, and then we're going to have about 15 minutes of question and answer from the students. So let me get to my introductions. First, we have Ariza Astari. She's very dear to me. She is a 2016 grad, and she works for she's an international relations specialist with the United States Department of Labor's Bureau of International Labor Affairs. Next up is Michael Overby, who I know is dear to Dr. Heather Neubauer, who's put a little note in the chat. And so Michael is a 05 grad, and he is Division Chief, Office of Knowledge Management, Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement Affairs for the U.S. Department of State. So you know that state had a police force, right? And next up is Rachel Parrish, who is dear to us as well. And she is an 09 grad. She's a Foreign Service Officer with the U.S. Mission to International Organizations, a division of the United States Department of State. And we're going to start off our conversation with Rachel. And so, Rachel, I'm going to start with you and ask this question, and then I want Ariza and Mike to answer this question as well. But what motivated you to pursue the career that you have today?
Thank you, Dr. Cosby, for that great introduction, and also hello to all the Furman students. And it's Mike and Ariza. It's great to be on a panel with you all. Ariza, we talked previously for a different panel, so it's great to see you again. You'll forgive me, I am located in Vienna right now, so it is a little bit late at night right now, so you'll forgive me for that. And also my internet connection, surprisingly for being in Vienna, is not great, so we'll work with that. But going back to your question, Dr. Cosby, I think there's a lot of reasons to serve in government. And I know part of the reason that I decided to pursue a career in government is because it's a very stable job in the federal government, especially during, it's tough economic times now. When I graduated from Furman in 2009, it was also tough economic times. And it is a very stable career. That's something that I really value in my life is stability. There's also, there's a lot of reasons of, getting to actually make a really big impact on your country and on policy. There's a lot of different opportunities for that as well, which I'm sure the political science students at Furman are learning a lot about. But really, when you get to the base of it, I think the main reason to serve in the federal government and to pursue a career in government is because you want to serve your country and your people. And for me, growing up, that was something that my parents instilled in me. My father served in the military, and he met my mom in the Vietnam War. My mother was a Vietnamese immigrant to the United States. And she worked in South Vietnam for the United States government as well when my parents met. and then she immigrated to marry my dad. And so, really valuing being an American citizen, and there is a very intense sense of patriotism in my family, and serving our country and our people, and trying to do all that I can to help improve our country and make a better life for our people and for the rest of the world. It sounds really idealistic, maybe also some would say bordering naive, but I think that at the base of it, that all of the people that I have encountered in the US government, that's the reason to join, is because you want to serve your country. And if that's not really the reason that you're joining, if you're trying to make a lot of money, or if for me, I travel for work, I move to different countries, but if that's what you want to do, there's a lot of other ways to do that besides joining the Foreign Service. So I would recommend pursuing some of those other ways if you don't have that need to serve your country, because it will get really difficult at times as you try to kind of pursue the greater good and do what you think is best for your country. And it does take at times something like really deep inside of you to say, no, this is why I'm doing this.
Well, I see in today's environment, that's actually very poignant and valuable to remind people of why people serve in governance, because they do want to serve their country for the right reason. So thank you for that. So Mike, let's go to you.
I thought Ariza was going to go next so that I could get a couple
Okay,
extra. No, I'm just kidding. Well, look, I think a lot of what Rachel said resonates with me and my own career path. I'm from Eastern North Carolina. A son of two public servants who worked in the school system and in the charitable organization, and that was always instilled in me as an important part of who I needed to be as an adult. And so part of my journey at Furman, I think, which Dr. Halvan-Neubauer was a big part of, was figuring out what that meant in my life and where I needed to take that. And actually, I'll say, since I mentioned Dr. Halvan-Neubauer, it was Furman, and in particular Dr. Halvan-Neubauer, who shoved me into a number of different avenues of trying to channel that energy and that interest, sending me on different internship programs with different organizations, starting out at a legal aid clinic in Durham, North Carolina, and getting that perspective to realize that if I did go to law school, I'd probably, for myself, for who I am, probably needed to end up working in public defender service or an organization like that, and grappling with, is that really what you want to do? And what does that mean for your paying your bills, and all of that, and so on and so forth, and ultimately through trial and error, really landing on foreign policy as a particular area of interest for me, and thinking through what that journey needed to be for me to get to where I've been able to get in my career. And so Furman was a big part of that. And I think it is about that exploration. It's about testing the waters and seeing what's which is not a privilege that everybody has, the ability to do that financially. And I do think that my experience, my time at Furman helped provide me that platform, because my family didn't always have the resources as well. So anyway.
It's interesting that you mentioned that Dr. Halvan-Neubauer pushed you to legal aid, because that's where I met him. Was at legal aid pushing another student intern into some direction so that they could figure out what their career choice was going to be. So Ariza, you want to tackle this?
Sure. I think what my fellow panelists mentioned also really resonated with me. And I think that really points to the sort of connecting thread of everybody who goes into public service, and that is to serve. I've always been, you know me, I've always been pretty civic minded, and I am the archetype Furman student in that I wanted to make a difference, right? And being a civic minded person, I guess I served with Teach for America when I first graduated Furman. And then after that, I really looked at my roots as a first generation immigrant. I was born and raised in Indonesia, and I just had this desire to want to multiply my impact. But at the same time, I realized that sort of my journey as a first generation immigrant and being the only person in my family actually that became a naturalized US citizen, this country has given so much to me. And I want to give that back. I kind of want to give back. And that's kind of what made me look at working for the government and what it is that I could do in my capacity to not only serve the country who's given much to me, but also to give back to the country that gave me my heritage. So I'm very, very, very fortunate to be working in the line of work that I do now because I do have sort of my portfolio consists of Indonesia and all these other countries within the region in which I'm from. So the fact that I have that opportunity with the US government and then having colleagues who share the same values as me, and on top of that, an increasingly diverse field of like minded people and career civil servants is genuinely inspiring to me. And so that's kind of when I realized that I really am in the right career. So,
That's great from all of you. So I have another question, and I want this conversation to be kind of free flowing so it doesn't sound so you next, you next, you next. And so the question revolves around how you would advise the seniors sitting out there to develop their resumes and their kind of how they're going to approach applying for a job in government. And one of the things, I recognized when I was talking to you all that we haven't talked kind of about what you do so that they can understand how to make that connection. So I'm going to start with you, Ariza, and go back the other way. And then the next time Mike's going to be first. And then
sure. Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about what I do and how that kind of relates to building our resume, especially for graduating seniors and anyone who's kind of looking into government or international affairs in general as a potential career. So, what I do now in my position as an international relations specialist, I kind of work at the nexus of policy and as it relates to labor rights, child labor, children's rights, and human rights. It's really great that in the United States, our trade agreements have this specific provision that says that anything that we consume as US consumers and anything that we import has to be in line with international standards on child labor and human trafficking and any labor exploitation. So that's pretty much what I do. I happen to have a portfolio of South Asian and Southeast Asian countries, as I mentioned earlier. And so I'm speaking from the experience of somebody who is kind of in the beginning of her career. So I'm kind of like, I'm in the driver's seat now. So I feel good about that. But I'm definitely not in the position where, I'm hiring people or supervising people. So this could be probably more applicable to those of you who are starting out. So for me, working in international affairs, of course, international experiences is something to highlight. Anything, if you were lucky enough to have gone abroad before COVID-19 times, definitely highlight that in your resumes, your languages experiences. I don't speak any of the UN languages except for English, but I am fluent in Indonesian. So I would still say list those things on your resume. It doesn't have to be something that's super mainstream, but I also know that Furman students tend to have a second major in languages, so definitely include that on your resumes too. But also, given the times that we live in right now, I would also encourage people to think outside of the box. So even if you were not able to go abroad, if you've taken Dr. Kalp's class or any classes that have anything to do with international affairs where you had to write a long paper that semester on China or in the Middle East, I wouldn't say, I would not suggest saying that you're now an expert in that specific region, but you at least have working knowledge of how that region works, the political process, so that you can then build upon it in your sort of career in international affairs. And then the second thing I would highlight is also your research experience. Hashtag Furman Advantage. Like being at Furman and doing a ton of research papers means that when you step into those careers, you may not be writing academic papers as somebody working in government, but you will be asked questions like that you may not know the answers to, but having that research experience could lead you to answering that question or finding the answers that are being asked of you. So highlighting any research experience with a particular professor, if you help them with a paper during the summer with the Furman Advantage grant, that's definitely something to highlight in your resume. It's always a strength. And finally, quantitative skills, which I have learned to always give a candidate an edge, especially somebody who's going into international affairs. So that intro to political analysis class with SPSS, definitely put that on your resume. It's great to have that skill. It's increasingly important and demanded in the field, I would say. So that would be my three pointers.
So now don't ever talk bad about the fact that you have to take political analysis.
Never.
So, Mike, you're in a different position because your title says division chief. So that sounds pretty important to me.
It's not.
Oh,
But thank you. No, look, I think everything that Arisa said is accurate and exactly on point. I'll start, Dr. Cosby, if it's okay with you, kind of explaining my position a little bit and kind of what my team does. I run a team of about 30 people inside the State Department that essentially serves as our internal think tank on criminal justice reform issues. And so my bureau, which has a long and boring title, spends about $1.3 billion a year providing assistance to foreign countries, but over 90 countries around the world, to help them improve their police services, their judiciaries, their prosecutorial services, their judges, their corrections organizations, and of course the logic being that if you improve their capacity to counter crime, counter drug trafficking, those types of things, that it reduces the pressure on criminal threats that are coming either to the United States or that are damaging U.S. interests around the world and our allies as well. One can argue with that logic, but that's the logic. And we spend about 1.3 billion. And so our team is basically a team of not me, but a team of former prosecutors, prison wardens, and police chiefs who sit inside of the State Department and tell us how not to spend money in a terrible way, and how to take U.S. practices and translate them into another country's experiences, which is a big challenge because every legal system is very unique, including in the U.S., right? I mean, we have 51 plus criminal justice systems in the U.S. In the most recent context, obviously, in the U.S. domestic conversation, the conversation inside the State Department has evolved too, which is what are those standards that we are exporting? Who are the police agencies that we are sending overseas, and what does that mean for our image? And so it's been a very interesting position. Yeah. Anyway, that's a little bit of an aside. I mean, to your question, Dr. Cosby, when I am hiring someone for my team, the question that I look at are first a lot of the questions that Arisa mentioned, but number one, is it written well? I'd like to see all the substantive reasons that you think that you can write well, but are there two spaces after a period? Is there just weird formatting stuff going on? And so point number one is can you actually present a coherent articulation of who you are as a person and what your life journey is? And that can be a challenge when you're talking about government hiring, because the process itself is terrible, and the systems are terrible, and it spits out a resume on the other end that I see that looks probably nothing like what you drafted. And so that's another challenge we can talk about. But I think writing skills are super huge, and on substance, demonstrating that you do have experience writing and doing analysis. I think I did not have the joy of a quantitative analysis class at Furman. I don't know if it didn't exist or if I ran the other way. But I would love to see that on my team, because I know I don't have that skill. I also would say, if you're interested in international affairs, demonstrating some form of expertise or background in negotiating skills or debating, a verbal exchange of ideas, or just public speaking and briefing, those types of skills are very important. And then, of course, exposure to foreign policy issues for me, of course, would be at the top of my list. And I agree, not every person has the opportunity to do all of the things that you might want to have done before you get to the State Department or to the Labor Department and other places. But how have you used your time? And another thing that I will look at at a resume when I'm hiring is, where are the gaps? What's missing? What have you been inactive for 3, 6 months at a time, 12 months at a time? And if so, I'm asking why. How often have you changed jobs? If you're shopping around every year for a new gig, then it tells me something potentially. And that's harder when you're hiring someone younger as opposed to someone more experienced, but it does reveal something if you can't kind of hack 2 years at a job somewhere. And sometimes you can't, right? Because some jobs are terrible. But anyway, that's a little bit about me, and happy to pass it on.
Yeah, you're always suspicious of that resume that doesn't have dates.
Yeah.
Dates. Like,
Yeah.
what are you hiding?
Yeah. Exactly. Oh, and I'm sorry, Dr. Cosby. One other thing that I will mention, since I raised it on the resume, the other thing that I would encourage is actually learning how to fill out and successfully apply for a resume on USA Jobs. Like, the civil service hiring system in the federal government is very unique, very specialized, and it's counterintuitive in terms of what information you need to put in there. And there's a very special, if you learn the art, you can get through to almost any job advertisement. But if you don't, you can run at that brick wall quite a lot.
So can you practice it, or?
Yes. Yeah,
Okay.
you should just apply for every job
Okay.
if you have a modicum of qualifications.
So apply for everyone, practice, and then once you got it down, go for the one you really want.
Right.
Okay, got you. That's valuable information.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you, Rachel.
Thanks. So a little bit more about my job to begin with. So I am a Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. State Department, and I have served previously in Manila and in Manila. I was the Human Rights Officer. In Hong Kong, I was a Consular Officer. And here in Vienna, I serve at our U.S. Mission to International Organizations. And Vienna is a special place because we have 3 missions in Vienna. We have our BILAT, which is our embassy that works on U.S.-Austria relations. We have our mission to OSCE, and then I work at our mission to international organizations. And the specific section that I work in deals with the IAEA, or the International Atomic Energy Agency. And so I'm sure you all have heard, as political science nerds, maybe government nerds, in the news, there's been a lot of discussion lately about the JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that the Obama administration initiated, and then the Trump administration withdrew from, and now the Biden administration has said that they're interested in renegotiating with Iran. So it has to do with nuclear weapons. It has to do with developing nuclear weapons. It's in the news a lot. The IAEA is responsible for doing these kinds of inspections in places like Iran and other places that aren't maybe quite so scary or on the edge as Iran. But the IAEA is also responsible for a lot of other things, such as the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And this has to do with using nuclear energy for cancer treatment, using irradiation techniques to sterilize insects, to cut down on insect populations that spread human diseases. It also the IAEA has labs that use irradiation techniques to develop additional, more resilient types of crops, so countries can better enhance their crop productivity. So there's a ton of different other work that the IAEA does that the United States helps support. So that's what's going on with our mission here and with our work. I am a generalist. So as you can see from these past 3 jobs that I've had at the State Department, they're all very different. Doing human rights work in the Philippines is very different than negotiating the JCPOA here in Vienna. That's very different work. Nuclear weapons versus human rights in the Philippines. So the way that I joined the State Department is quite different because the Foreign Service track is very different than the Civil Service track. And I never cracked the code on USA Jobs, so well done for doing that. That's a very difficult code to crack. I was lucky enough to crack the code for the Foreign Service test, however. And the way that the civil service works is it's a lot of your background and your experience and how you showcase that to get through the system, and then you interview and then make it through to get the job. The Foreign Service, on the other hand, is very much a skills-based test, and it is a test. There's 3 steps to the process. The first is a written test. The second part is written essays, written test, basically. And then the third part is an all-day oral exam, where you are evaluated on the skills and judgment that you bring to the table. So they're judging you on your writing skills. They're judging you on how you interact with others in a group setting. They're judging how you, there's 13 different precepts that they judge for the Foreign Service. And so it's not so much what your background is, that you have those quant skills. It's how you think and how you analyze. Because in the Foreign Service, I think the most important thing for us, when we're sending diplomats abroad, is that we trust you to represent us well. We trust you to have good judgment in the field, to make sure that you can represent our country and our government. Because you're not always. I live several time zones away. I'm not always going to be able to go back to my headquarters to Mike in DC and say, hey, what does Washington think about this? I need to be able to make decisions sometime in a very quick manner. So I have to be trusted. I joined the Foreign Service kind of through a very traditional route, where I went to graduate school for my master's in law and diplomacy at the Fletcher School in Boston at Tufts University. And then I joined. But to become a Foreign Service officer, you don't have to have that background. In my orientation class, we had a former chef, we had a former ballet dancer, we had a former movie theater owner, in addition to, of course, a lot of the people who went through the traditional route like I did. I also benefited from a couple of different State Department fellowship programs, which helped me kind of get prepared for a career in the State Department. And one of them was the Critical Language Scholarship Program, which Furman was actually running this for the State Department at the time, for when I was at Furman. And Dr. Kaup initiated it, actually. And I got a scholarship for a summer to go and study Chinese in Suzhou, right outside of Shanghai. And I studied there for 3 months to help improve my Chinese. And the State Department paid for it, which was great. Then I also received a fellowship called the Wrangel Fellowship. And this is where the State Department invested in me and paid for my graduate school. And in turn, I committed to a certain number of years to serve in the State Department. And part of the reason that they're investing in this is, one, to increase diversity in the Foreign Service. That's a really big push, especially right now with our new Secretary of State, I believe, is quite keen to develop our diversity. And also to develop a little bit more of the foreign policy expertise by getting that graduate degree level, because you can actually come into the Foreign Service with the only requirement is that you have a high school diploma, which gives us a lot of unique experiences, but trying to make sure that we can professionalize and make sure that we do have some of that foreign policy, theory and history and background. And there are a lot of different other State Department fellowships and scholarships for studying abroad that might fit some of your interests. And if you can do those in your summers in between, your sophomore and junior year, or before you graduate from Furman, I think those are really good stepping stones into the State Department specifically, or I think they would be looked favorably upon any job in the federal government.
And Rachel, you're going to kind of send some of that information to Mr. Hairston?
I will, absolutely. I'll send a list, and then he can send it out to all of the students.
All right, thank you. That's really great.
Mm-hmm.
And also, I think Dr. Kaup's classes are going to fill up pretty quickly for those who are interested in these types of jobs. So, Mike, as I promised, I'm coming to you first. are there skills that you use on a daily basis at your job that you wish you developed more while you were at Furman? Or the reverse kind of this question, or what skills did you develop at Furman that have been valuable to you in the work that you do today?
Really good question, Dr. Cosby. My answer is going to be similar to my previous answers. I'll try not to be overly repetitive. I think the first thing that I do is 7 out of 8 hours of my day is spent in meetings, collaborative discussion. State Department, at least, is very much, let's get on Zoom, let's talk it through, whatever. And a lot of, and part of that's because I'm in a management role right now, but it is a very interpersonal heavy job, and I think that's probably true for my colleagues who also work in international affairs. Diplomacy does not happen unless you talk to someone. And one of the biggest challenges we have at the State Department is a bunch of people who are really bad at talking to people, or who offend people, walk into the room, and I've done that myself sometimes. But I do think that interpersonal, that practice, that comfort level is something that was important to me to practice at Furman and has been very critical in my career growth. And I attribute things like the Riley Institute, a number of, I helped start a Rotary type club at Furman when I was there, and those types of things, just regularly getting up and doing public speaking and being I'm a natural introvert, I'm awkward, I'm weird, and forcing myself into those environments, I think has been really important for my career. I also think the ability to brief complex issues in a very short amount of time is very important. Not this job, but 2 jobs ago, I was a kind of chief of staff for our assistant secretary of state. So not Tony Blinken, the secretary of state, not the deputy, not the undersecretary, but like that row right under the 4th tier political appointees, but still Senate confirmed. And I was chief of staff for our assistant secretary. And he was a terrifying guy, really brilliant, but terrifying. And I was scared to talk to him because I've seen him like throw people out of the office, and he was a difficult person, but also very brilliant. And my one opportunity a day to get him on things that I needed to get him on, talk to him about, get his guidance, get his advice, was twice a day when he would walk past my office to the refrigerator and to the water cooler to get his lunch and then go back to his office. And I knew that as soon as I said his name, I had about 30 seconds before he was tired of me. And if you boil down all the problems that a $1.3 billion organization has, right, into 30 seconds, that's what you need to be able to do. And you need to be able to communicate a lot of really difficult issues to people who don't have time for it and help them understand those issues. So anything that gives you an opportunity to practice that type of verbal briefing, whether it's in a class or at an event that you're organizing, it's a good experience and it will pay dividends for you. I think also negotiating skills, which is a little bit different than briefing skills. So not just being able to explain something at somebody, but also to be able to understand what a good negotiation looks like and what a good outcome is for a negotiation. One of the foundational books that they teach at the State Department, the Foreign Service Institute at the State Department, is Getting to Yes. If you haven't read it, it's a really good book that talks about how everyone can get something out of a negotiation, and that actually is the sign of a successful negotiation. And practice, if there are opportunities I remember in Furman classes, there were times that we did the simulations and were able to practice being Morocco and stormed out of someone's class. I can't remember which professor's class over Western Sahara though, so I got an A. So anything that gives you experience in negotiation, I think is good. And then I'll come back again to writing. At the end of the day, government is bureaucracy. And if you don't codify it, if you don't put it in a format that will survive the lateral clearance process as it moves up for approval, then you haven't done your job. You can be a really smart person, but you have to lock it down in paper, in process, in policy, and in some places regulation. And writing well is at the cornerstone of all of that.
Sounds great. Rachel, do you need me to repeat the question?
No, that's okay. Thanks, though. I would underscore everything that Mike said. I completely agree. I think that so presentation skills I think are key, and what I would term what Mike has called is his 30 seconds that he had to grab his principal's attention. I would call that the elevator pitch of you have that very small amount of time. My personal antidote for this is here in Vienna when we will have a giant international conference where there's people from all over the world. Well, pre-COVID times, we would have these really big international conferences where there's people from all over the world. We would have 150 delegates from the United States. My ambassador is in charge of that, and I am riding in the car with her, and I have 30 seconds to tell her, this is what's going on with our delegation. This is the problem that we're having with talking to, I don't know, the Kuwaitis, or this is the problem we're having in talking to Brazil, or whatever the case may be. And I have such a small amount of time to explain it to her in very simple terms that she gets it and she knows what we need to do and if she needs to take any action on that. So I would definitely underscore that. For negotiating skills, I think that there's a couple of different types of negotiating skills. One is when you're working in a team together and you're trying to kind of work towards a goal and bounce ideas off of each other, which I think the group work at Furman is really great for. You're in a study group, you're working on a group project, and you all want to get an A on the project, or you all want in that simulation, you want your country to come out on top, whatever the case may be. So that's one type. Another type that I didn't experience in the State Department until I came here in Vienna is formal negotiations. And so that's when I am in the big room and we're literally on the screen doing line by line negotiations for a document, some sort of document that all of these delegations are going to agree to. And this is it's something that I really enjoy, and it could be tedious. Some would find it tedious going line by line like this, but I find it a lot of fun because it's not just the surface negotiations of what you actually see in the room of, oh, the US doesn't actually want this part, and Canada supports the US in not wanting this line. You really have to, referring to the book that Mike talked about, Getting TS, you really have to go back and understand why. Why does the US not want this? Why does Brazil want to put this in there? And find where, it's not just the language, but you have to find where you can meet in the middle and find some common agreement and find language that is both agreeable to both sides. So that is a very specific type of negotiation that I think actually could, after having learned it here in Vienna, I think it will really benefit me in other parts of my career as well. And then just one more thing to underscore on writing. I know at Furman, I wrote so many research papers, and they were long research papers, and it's academic writing. That's what you're doing in school. That's why you're in school, is to do that type of academic writing. But I would recommend working on your writing to make it, if you're interested in a career in government, to make it more concise, because I get a million cables a day, and I do not have time to read a really long academic piece. And I'm not even that important. So the people that are much more important than me have even less time than me. So if you want to get a message across to them, you really have to learn how to state what we call bluffing, bottom line up front. And then, you can lay out your reasons later. But also learning how to, I took my freshman composition course with Dr. Bainbridge, and she was all about cutting out, the extra language and keeping your writings for her class really short and pithy and concise. There's no need for these long and flowery languages. And a mentor of mine in the Foreign Service, actually, he's like, why would you use adverbs? Never use an adverb. So learning how to do that type of writing, I think would be really helpful in government work.
So direct, concise, and to the point. All right, Ariza.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have much more to add because I think my colleagues have pretty much nailed it right in the head of all the skills that are really important in the job. What I would add to that, to everything that's been said by Mike and Rachel, is to not undersell the experiences that you've had with student organizations as well at Furman. So I am the archetype of the overworked for absolutely no reason student at Furman because I want to be involved in everything. And I think prior to my negotiation skills class in grad school, where we read actually Getting to Yes as well, and we had like a weekend long seminar on the book and just negotiation skills. The skills that those negotiation skills were kind of primed during those student organization days. I remembered I was part of the founding members of TEDx Furman U. And at the time, the organization was called Furman Creative Collaborative. So I had worked on sort of so unlike Mike, I spent 7 to 8 hours on emails. So I kind of worked on getting those emails to be clear, direct, succinct, because like Rachel said, everybody who's above me has like 5 seconds to read an email. So I have to make it really count and really important and really direct. So having those skills within student organizations is also really important. So if you're looking to kind of enhance your skills, and maybe you don't have as much time left while you're at Furman, shop around the student organizations and see how you can be active as well. Because outside of the academic realm, those soft skills can come in really, really handy later when you are applying for government jobs. And it could be really, really impactful too when you are on the job. So, yeah.
Thank you, Ariza. So we're right about at 42 minutes. And so now I'm going to test you all to see how good you really are with these 30-minute elevator pitches. In answering this last question, how did you get to where you are today? And were there any unexpected detours? And so who wants to start? This is open to see who wants to really demonstrate that you can do what you're telling students to do. Mike, since you brought it up.
Not taking that. I've never been known for being good at it. But no, look, I think what I will say is that for my career, at least, every stop on it has been a detour. I mean, and I think that has been, to a degree, the secret to my happiness in my career and the journey that I've had so far, which is that I have been open to where the doors open and where the opportunity arises. And so, to be honest with you, my path to this, I did not dream of doing drug control for the State Department. Although now I'm the person in the State Department that does cannabis legalization, which is an interesting issue. But
everyone.
Yeah, we have to defend that we are in compliance with international treaties, and we are anyway. Separate issue. But I will say one of the reasons that I ended up being able to develop this career is because I did follow Dr. Halva Neubauer's advice. I took some money from Furman, went to Washington, did an internship at the Organization of American States, which is the Latin America kind of regional organization based here in DC. And my time at the OAS was fine. I kind of did some research on the Model OAS program, which is similar to Model UN. But actually, the way I got my job was because I waited tables and I needed to pay the bills. And one of my customers was a State Department employee who was speaking Spanish. I dropped everything when I met him, realized that he worked at the State Department, and started speaking to him and his wife in Spanish and stayed in contact. Fast forward through a number of years later, grad school, et cetera. And I came back and submitted an application to the State Department for a student program. And just threw my name in the hat because I knew I wanted to work at the State Department. I followed up with an email to this mentor of mine who I'd stayed in contact with over the years and just kept him updated on what I was doing. I said, hey, just FYI, if you know anybody that needs, someone to abuse and I could be a doorstop, I'll do anything. He didn't respond to my email. He never responded to my email, but 1 week later, I got a job offer. And I guess my point, I've exceeded 30 seconds, but my point is that my point is that you don't know which relationships you develop along your journey will pay back for you later. And it's not always the ones that you think. So being present, being open, being flexible to that journey. Every agency in the federal government does international affairs work if you're interested in international work. This is one opportunity that I've had and a great place to work, but there are many places in DC and around the country where you can do similar work.
Great. Do either one of you want to jump in on this challenge, or we could go to questions, because I understand from Alex we have some great questions in the chat box. So let's go to questions. Okay. So Alex, did you want to tell us read us the questions?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of them seem a little bit more pointed, but I'm going to go in the order that they were submitted. So the first question is from an anonymous attendee. Would you say it's possible or normal to change from a foreign to civil service job and vice versa?
Okay. Who wants to take that one? Okay.
Rachel.
I'll take that one. So it is possible. It's especially it's possible to go from foreign service to civil service. I know some colleagues who have done it. Maybe there's some reasons why you no longer want to move around the world, family reasons, health reasons, whatever the case may be. And then you have to still go through the hiring process just like civil servants do. There's some special, there are some special routes for converting from foreign service to civil service, but it's possible. There's also a program for converting from civil service to foreign service, but I think that's slightly more difficult because they only take a certain number of people per year for this program. It's called the Mustang program, I think is what it's still called. And I think that's in part just because there are a lot fewer foreign service slots every year than there are civil service positions. We have a lot more civil servants in DC than we do foreign service officers abroad.
Excellent. Next one, what are your tips for a USA Jobs resume? Where do you recommend we learn those tips and tricks?
Ooh. All right, Ariza.
Sure, yes. So some tips that I have for USA Jobs resume is to read the entire posting of USA Jobs first, and then 2, read the part where it says qualifications, and make sure that you are qualified, because one of the first dings that you get from USA Jobs is if you do not meet the qualifications, it's going to automatically reject you. And also later you get a questionnaire. So once you click submit, there's a questionnaire where you have to answer all of these questions too. So sometimes your answers to those questions are going to ding you from USA Jobs too. So make sure that when you answer those, first determine that you're qualified. And 2, my biggest tip is after reading the entire posting, copy and paste, one more time, copy and paste all of the verbs that you see there to your actual federal resume. So if it says researchers or analyzes, make sure you use the words research and analyze and all of those things, because like Mike said, the process of applying through USA Jobs is really, really lengthy and difficult. And there's a part where sort of the computer and the algorithm checks to see whether you're qualified or not. And one of the ways you can kind of check through that is by having those specific verbs and adjectives that are within the posting itself on USA Job matches your actual resume. It's also important to note, like Mike said also, that federal resumes are not the same as the regular old one-page resumes. They are very long, and they are later read by an actual human being. So they tend to be, mine's about 5 pages or so, and it details my entire sort of work experience. I'm happy to share resources. I have a couple of book recommendations on the federal resumes, which I will also share with Mike later, and also a very lengthy document for a very lengthy resume that you will be writing on USA Jobs on exactly the step-by-step process of writing a federal resume and how you can ensure that you can make it there. And also, if you are social media minded like me, there is a subreddit on Reddit called USA Jobs. So do browse USA Jobs, and there are tips there, and also people who always ask questions on tips to get through USA Jobs. So
Wow, that's complicated.
very.
Okay, Alex,
Oh,
back
my.
to you.
Is there a delay in entry-level position postings for recent grads because of COVID/funding? USA Jobs appears to not have many positions open currently. And this is a two-parter. When do departments and agencies begin to open applications?
So who's taking that one? Mike?
I'm not sure if I know the whole answer to that. The answer probably is somewhere in the yes category. I think what you are probably seeing, at least I will say for the State Department, is a residual effect of the Secretary Tillerson era, where there was a pretty strict hiring freeze on the State Department, as well as employment caps. So certain offices and bureaus couldn't hire above certain caps. And so I do think that over the next few months, year or so, you will start to see more positions open up, especially as new opportunities and funding becomes available. But yeah, and I think with time, the other thing that I will say is that whatever opportunity you have to chase a fellowship program, like Wrangell Fellows is a really good example, or other mechanism that helps you get in that door or helps you navigate that process, jump on it, take them, and fight as hard as you can to try and grab one of those. I tried for a presidential management fellowship and was denied. They still let me in. So it's not a big deal. You can still have a good career regardless, but those are great opportunities as well.
I'd also add, it might be helpful also to, there's a way that you can kind of get daily emails on opportunities that are open too. So if you want to do a keyword of Pathways Recent Graduates Program, that's kind of how I got into the civil service. I was a graduate student and I got into the Pathways. Also did not get the PMF, Mike, so same with you. But you can do that. You can also do it for foreign affairs, international relations, anything that you are interested in. You can get those daily emails. I got those emails daily and applied to this position. So instead of doing the waiting game, you can kind of do it a little bit more pointed and less on the waiting side.
And I would just add, for those that are interested in a foreign service job, the test is offered at specific times throughout the year. So you have to start with the written exam it's like taking the SATs or the GREs. It's a standardized test. It's on a computer. Even if you think, oh, I don't want to join the foreign service until like maybe after I finish grad school or maybe after I get a couple years of work experience or something, that's fine. But I would say go ahead and start taking the test now, because it's a very low acceptance rate to make it all the way through until the end. I think it's like less than 6% or something that actually start the process and then make it through to actually receiving a job offer as a foreign service officer. So at every step, people are weeded out. So if you start with a written exam, then you might not pass the first time. And that happens with a lot of foreign service officers, that then they need to take it a couple of times, and they might even have like multiple applications going at the same time. So I would recommend taking it early and often because it's free. So why not?
So is there a cap, Rachel, on how many times you can take the test?
There's not a cap on how many times you can take it. There is a cap on how long in between for certain steps of the process. I think you have to wait a year between taking, I'm not sure if it's the written one, but they would have those details on the website though.
Do they have practice tests like you can buy out there? Okay.
They do have practice tests. I think there's like a free one available from the State Department. And while I'm not a user of Reddit, so I'm not sure if they have something like Reddit, but back in the day they had something on Yahoo Groups about how to study for the foreign service exam. So I don't think Yahoo Groups exists anymore, which is showing my age. But I'm sure there's some sort of resource out there where people, like I know there were study groups in DC where a lot of people were taking the test, where they would practice doing the group exam together.
You're right, Rachel. There is a Reddit r/foreign service. Not that I've browsed it or anything, but it's very helpful. My friend tells me.
Thank you, Ariza, and your friend. Alex?
Yeah, I'm going to shamelessly plug here a little bit for the Malone Center. What Ariza was talking about with the daily job alerts, if you have any questions about that, you can come talk to me. I do know how to do that in USA Jobs.
Oh, there you go. Furman, the TFA.
All right, next question. And this kind of goes off what Rachel was talking about. For the foreign service, do you have the opportunity to choose where you serve, or do you apply for the position and go wherever they send you?
That is a really great question. So, when you join the Foreign Service on your very first day of orientation, you have to sign like a million documents. And it's like, I don't know, all of this intake paperwork, which I'm sure you have to do for a lot of federal jobs of, your life insurance or your health insurance or whatever. But one of the forms you have to sign for the Foreign Service is that you have worldwide availability. And this means that you are available for the needs of the service. So if tomorrow they decide, actually, we really need you to serve in Port Moresby right now, then I have to make myself available and I have to go where the needs of the service are. I have never heard of it getting that extreme where they would pull you out of one assignment and stick you somewhere else that you really did not want to go, because fortunately in the Foreign Service, there's a lot of people with a lot of different needs. And so while my career, I've been really fortunate to serve in what we call in the Foreign Service garden spots like Hong Kong and Vienna that are really beautiful and really nice cities. Some people really love to serve in developing countries where maybe it's cheaper to live. And they can have a really big house instead of a small apartment in the middle of a city. Like I prefer to live in a small apartment in the middle of a city. I don't want a big house to take care of. So there's a lot of different interests, and so it kind of sorts itself out. When you join the Foreign Service at the entry level, so your first usually 2-ish tours, those are what we call directed assignments. And so you have a very limited list based on the timing of your rotation, where they say, these are the posts that are available to you. Let us know what you think, but we're going to tell you where to go. Now I'm at the mid-level. And so at the mid-level, it's a little bit more like applying for a regular job where you interview with the hiring manager, you submit your resume, you say, hey, this is why I would be really good for this job, you should hire me. But in the Foreign Service and in the State Department, there's, kind of like what Mike was saying of it's who you know is really important. Those connections you make are really important. In the State Department, there's something we call corridor reputation. And this is where, people you've worked with in previous assignments, or people that you went through orientation with, or people that you had that week-long class on international religious freedom with for a week in Bangkok that you met. This is where that comes into play, because the hiring manager, for example, for my job here in Vienna, he knew my consul general in Hong Kong. And so my consul general called him up and said, hey, Rachel does a really good job in Hong Kong, so you should really hire her for this job. And so there are a ton of qualified candidates, but because my hiring manager really trusted the judgment of my consul general, that helped give me an extra edge for sure. So it's still, once you're into the system, it is definitely still, based on how well you work with people, and more like a traditional, even private sector kind of hiring, where your reputation is really, really important.
Well, you may be in a small apartment, but that pattern behind you, that paint pattern, is pretty nice. I've been admiring it all night.
Thank you.
So we have about a minute and a half left on the clock. Alex, do we have any more questions?
We have two, so hopefully we can get through them quickly. The first one is, do you have many colleagues, individuals that work in government that got where they are via law school, and would you say going to grad school is more advantageous in this field?
So who went to grad school on the panel? Everybody. Law school. Okay. So is law school a thumbs down, or?
I wouldn't say necessarily. I actually do have quite a few colleagues who have law degrees and were former attorneys, because I work in that nexus of human rights and labor rights. So I have a ton of colleagues who are more senior than me, and they work in various capacities, and they use their law degree quite often because we work with a number of international instruments. So I would say it is advantageous if you are kind of looking into that sort of international human rights sphere, anything having to do with human rights. And I also have a few colleagues who have PhDs as well. So I would say going to grad school is advantageous. I don't know if I would be able to say if it's more advantageous than not going to grad school. It's certainly helpful, but grad school is expensive. So definitely do the cost benefit analysis, because you can definitely get into government without going to grad school.
All right, last question. This one's real easy, I hope. Is speaking another language fluently a must have for working in international affairs?
Just say it. I mean, I think for foreign service, it might be more of that, especially if you have certain critical language skills that the service needs, right, to fill certain gaps. For my career, it was not a like it wasn't on the USA Jobs advertisement that I had to speak Spanish. But I think because I spoke Spanish, I got hired, right? And because I speak Spanish, it has helped me in certain negotiating environments where the Mexicans are chairing, and like, well, you got to work with them, and so it helps to be able to throw around some Mexican slang, and so I do think that it is very much worth investing in. For me, it's fun also, so it's a double whammy.
Rachel?
Yeah, I would agree with that. For the foreign service, because of the critical languages, if you speak one of those critical languages at a certain level, then that will actually help bump up your score on the oral exam. So it will help you kind of get across the finish line in the foreign service hiring process. But it's not a requirement, and the Foreign Service actually, we have an entire Foreign Service Institute that teaches classes, and a lot of those are language classes. I have not had the benefit of taking any of those language classes yet, but the Foreign Service, and we're trying to do better in this and investing in our people. And so if you get an assignment to Indonesia, then they will send you for like 9 months of language training at the Foreign Service Institute before you go on that posting.
I would also add a little bit, since we talked about grad school in the last question, if you are looking into a grad program in international affairs, a lot of them, at least recently, since I had just graduated in 2020, a lot of them have a requirement to have some sort of proficiency in another language. So I would also say to look into those requirements of the program. Not all, but many, at least the ones that I did apply to, all of them did have that foreign language requirement. So definitely look into that.
Well, I want to thank all of you. You've been a great panel. Alex, you've been a great question reader. Welcome back to Furman. Unfortunately, you're not on the campus, but we do appreciate your willingness to participate in this webinar tonight. And we hope our students got a lot of valuable information so that they can secure the jobs that they want in foreign in the U.S. government, in the State Department in particular. So, Alex, do you have anything else to add about how the students can access the resources that are going to be sent to Malone Center?
Yeah, we will send out an email following this event. So thank you all for coming. Thank you, panelists, for spending your time, especially Rachel. I can't imagine what time it is in Vienna right now. But yes, and that way we can get in contact once we have those resources. And in the question and answer, there was a question about how to reach out to each of you. So for the students who didn't see the answer, please feel free to reach out to myself. So alex.ricciuti@furman.edu, or to the Malone Center email at career.engagement@furman.edu, and we'll be happy to connect you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you
so much.
And thank you to the moderator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cosby.
Thank you.
Stay in touch, everyone.